Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 494, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 4. How the fear of Elohim empowers you to find and to navigate the way of escape. The podcast objectives are analyze how spiritual values, reverence, and worship help you navigate the way of escape, reveal the first moment of truth in your quest, and analyze the primary illustration of worship and the roles of sacrifice and death. A path you cannot find. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 360 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we began analyzing how reverence helps you navigate the way of escape. And then we made an immediate pivot. To wit, we spent the majority of that podcast analyzing how the degrees of virtue, obedience, and faith help you to find and navigate the way of escape. Here is why. It would be difficult to appreciate how the fear of Elohim empowers you to navigate the way of escape if you fail to appreciate the roles of virtue, obedience, and faith. This should be clear, for we came to see how the same rule applies to heart regulation. Ergo, we spent a considerable amount of time analyzing how obedience and faith via mind regulation open the door for you to achieve heart regulation. If you recall, this was the primary topic of End Times 492, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 2, which was posted last Friday, June 20th, 2025. Here lies a connection vis-a-vis the bridge that unites the two most recent podcasts. Consider this. You will never succeed in navigating the way of escape if your heart and your mind have not been regulated. Now, this should not be too hard to understand, for regulation promotes stability. And thus, if your mind is unstable, you will never find the way of escape. And if your heart is unstable, you will never follow it. Ergo, the Ruach led me to initiate this mini-series by reviewing the importance of a regulated heart and a regulated mind. And then he led me to show you how these are the foundation of your ability to find and to navigate the way of escape. From now, we must unite the prime objectives of the past two podcasts into a single message, which reveals how the fear of Elohim is the interval where you achieve heart regulation, which allows you to succeed every test, trial, and spiritual battle by giftedly navigating the way of escape. Let's get started. Now, first things first, we have already analyzed the role of spiritual values in this endeavor. To wit, we concluded Friday's podcast by analyzing how your spiritual values are the key ingredient to achieving heart regulation. Along these lines, your ability to regulate your heart is centered on your spiritual values. And thus, more than anything, your spiritual values are the primary drivers of heart regulation. Here is why. Your spiritual values unite your heart and your mind to do the Father's will by uniting your desires and your perspective. In doing so, your spiritual values ensure that your thoughts, decisions, intentions, and actions are constantly aligned with the Father's will. Now, it doesn't take a spiritual genius to realize how critical this matter is. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, if you don't unlock the power of spiritual values, your heart will never be regulated. Not only this, but you will also lose any degree of regulation you have achieved in your mind. And trust me, you will never succeed the way of escape without a regulated mind. For you cannot navigate a path that you are not able to find. To give our hearts perspective. Now, that speaks to how your spiritual values increase your ability to navigate the way of escape. And here again, this is the bridge that connects the two most recent podcasts. Along these lines, we initiated the most recent podcast with reverence, i.e., the focal degree of the fear of Elohim. In doing so, I reminded you how the primary illustration of reverence is the eyes of your heart, which gives your heart perspective. Like your spiritual values, your perspective, which is an evolution of your spiritual values, is critical in your ability to navigate the way of escape. For perspective, again, like your spiritual values, is critical to achieving heart regulation. Let's talk about it. Now, first of all, your perspective helps you achieve heart regulation by ensuring your perspective is aligned with the Father's perspective. Here is why this is so critical in navigating the way of escape. When your perspective is aligned with the Father's perspective, you will not be discouraged when the path gets dark and you can't find your way. Quite the contrary, for every time the way of escape becomes hard to see, Yahuwah will open the eyes of your heart, and he will let you know you are right where he wants you to be. Now, many of us are not ignorant of these matters. Trust me, we know that tough times are coming, for conflicts and offenses are features of this way. Not only this, but at the conclusion of every spiritual battle, another battle is already being formed as our tomorrow becomes today. Here lies the problem vis-a-vis, even though we know testing time is coming, we lack the spiritual perspective required to succeed. And this is where reverence comes on to the scene, giving our heart the perspective we chiefly need. You can see this by observing the image to the right. To wit, reverence renews your spiritual heart by giving it perspective. In doing so, reverence ensures your concepts, imagination, and truth are aligned with the perspective of the Father's will. This brings us to a crucial revelation concerning your spiritual heart. And this is one I advise you to share and to bookmark. The most critical facet in your being, as it pertains to the salvation of your soul, is your spiritual heart. And of all the 64 degrees of holiness, reverence is the one degree designed to transform it. We know this to be true because of the contents of your spiritual heart. Let's talk about it, beginning with the model of concepts. Along these lines, concepts represent the foundation of the Father's will. This division is crucial, for it receives the data points supporting the thoughts generated within your mind. Now, here lies the inflection. To wit, without this faculty, you would have no potential of ever achieving alignment between the thoughts in your mind and the thoughts in your heart. Why? It's because alignment requires conception, or what are you aligning on? Ergo, where there is no conception of thought, there can be no alignment of thought. And where there is no alignment of thought, there can be no informed intent. And where there is no informed intent, there can be no execution of the Father's will. Now, this brings us to the imagination. No doubt, the critical nature of this division can easily be appreciated by understanding the downfall of an evil imagination. In End Times 461, How Prejudice Plagues the Heart, Part 1, which was posted on April 30th, 2025, we analyze the danger and the source of an evil imagination. Notwithstanding, when your imagination is renewed by reverence, your heart can comprehend the unlimited potential of Yahuwah's goodwill and how far he will go to guard his chosen ones. And this, my friends, is the primary reason why the dying nation of Israel does not believe in the power of the Ruach. It is why they are not seeing miracles, and it is why they are not being healed. It is for the following reason, which I'll offer as an inflection point. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. You will never experience a spiritual reality that you cannot imagine nor conceive. For where there is no conception, there can be no imagination, for you do not believe. Now, this brings us to the third and final division of your spiritual heart. Enter truth. This is also a key matter, which I will begin to address with the following interest point. The primary requirements upon worship, i.e., the critical degree of reverential fear, are spirit and truth. And when your spiritual heart is renewed by reverence, you, for the first time in your life, will be positioned to fulfill these requirements. Now, here again, this is plain to see, for truth is in your spiritual heart. The key word being spiritual. Ergo, spirit and truth are united via reverence, which qualifies your worship. Here again, this is why your spiritual heart is the most critical facet of your being, for you can do nothing of eternal value apart from the unification of spirit and truth. Believe it. And yet, as crucial as reverence is in this endeavor, I caution you to remember everything we have covered thus far in this lesson is contingent to the operations of virtue, obedience, and faith. My dear friends, this is why I constantly provide summaries of the degrees we have already covered and the victories you have prior obtained. It is because this entire procedure is progressive and there are critical milestones along the way. For the purpose of this lesson, you should consider how this is indeed a crucial milestone, for all we have achieved until now, from faith to reverence, has been leading us to this primary goal, that is, to give our hearts perspective. Therefore, I beseech you, by the mercies of Elohim, ask him day and night to open the eyes of your heart. Ask him to give your heart perspective, to conceive his will, to imagine the blessings he has in store for those who love him and to receive the truth he desires to impart. Take the opportunity to worship. Now, this brings us to worship, vis-a-vis the final step you must take to achieve heart regulation. And due to the work of the 14 degrees which precede it, this should be the least complicated step you take in the process. Along these lines, worship is the primary application of purification, and purification plays a critical role in heart regulation. Consider this, my friends, and remember, it is impossible to have a heart that is fixed to do the Father's will if your heart is unclean. And thus, purification is the critical phase in achieving heart regulation. Now, we can prove this by employing the linear model of holiness. To wit, worship is the primary application of purity. Ergo, the full breadth of the power of purification is not realized until you unlock the power of worship. Along these lines, we understand that purification tears down the wall of partition that separates us from the Father and his goodwill. She does this by eliminating defilement, the critical factor of every model of spiritual separation. Now, that being said, the question we should chiefly entertain is this: by tearing down the wall of partition, what does purification empower us to do? The answer is sure. By knocking down the wall of partition, purification opens the door for us to engage Elohim in divine worship. For we, at this juncture, have achieved heart regulation, and we are reigning over all the degrees of prejudice and contempt. Now, that speaks to the role of worship in heart regulation. You must now address the role of worship in navigating the way of escape, which is largely straightforward and yet even more powerful. Consider this: the conclusion of every interval within the way of escape is a crossroads where we are given the opportunity to worship or to blaspheme. We know this first and foremost because worship and blasphemy are the only two opportunities within your heart. You can see this by observing the image to the right. Now, this becomes even more clear when you analyze the nature of worship against blasphemy in the context of navigating the way of escape. Here is why. You have no prospects of navigating the way of escape if you resist the guidance of the set apart spirit. We know this because resisting the guidance of the spirit is an act of blasphemy. For by resisting his spirit, you are showing contempt for Elohim. Not only this, but resisting the guidance of the set apart spirit is a byproduct of vanity and clear evidence of insanity. Remember, the way of escape is orchestrated by Elohim, and he has given us his set apart spirit to guide us through every phase. And the only way we will succeed is if we take the opportunity to worship while resisting the temptation to blaspheme his name. Now, knowing this, it would take a vain fool to suggest he or she is more qualified to navigate the way of escape than the Ruach of Elohim. And yet, vain fools are making these claims every day, for they scoff at the opportunity to worship and they rush at every chance to blaspheme. Now, this brings us to the question of the hour, vis-a-vis, how do you take the opportunity to worship while guarding your heart from blasphemy? The answer is sure. To wit, every time you reach a crossroads in your quest, you must choose to follow the way of escape. Now, there are many reasons why you will always find the way of escape. And yet, for the sake of time, I will only address two. And this is the moment of truth. Let's get to work. How you can succeed. The moment of truth. Now, the first reason why you will always find the way of escape is sure. My dear friends, you have the Ruach of Elohim, and he has been leading you from the very beginning until now. However, this does not mean that you will always know the path in real time. Quite the contrary, there are many intervals in your quest where you must wait on the Ruach until he reveals the path to you. Here again, it is because the way of escape does not exist at the outset of any test, trial, or spiritual battle. Quite the contrary, the way of escape is formed as you walk in obedient faith to the Father's will, which is revealed to you by his Spirit from day to day. Now, this brings us to reason number two, which is even more obvious than the first. And I advise you to remember it, especially if worse comes to worst. As there are only two paths at this interval in your quest, the path that leads to worship will always be the path that is more difficult to navigate. Now, this speaks to the incongruent natures of holiness and lawlessness, which we have analyzed from the very beginning of this exposition. To wit, it is much easier to pursue lawlessness than it is to pursue holiness. Why? It's because lawlessness is parallel to our default human nature. It represents the status quo. On the other hand, set apartness is contrary to our default human nature, and it requires you to persistently go against the grain. Notwithstanding, you are more than able to succeed for the simple but sure fact that you've been going against the grain from the very start. And in doing so, you unlock the power to free your mind, which opened the door for you to free your heart. In this order, succeeding the interval of worship will require you to operate in all the degrees of faith, obedience, and virtue. And this, my friends, is why you will always succeed the way of escape if you remain true. Consider this. By operating in all the degrees of virtue, obedience, and faith, you are, in effect, operating in the fear of Elohim. Ergo, you are reigning over every degree of lawlessness that would prevent you from finding and navigating the way of escape. For this was your mission from the start. Get rid of the lawlessness in your mind and then do the same for your heart. Now, even though this is a sure matter, I will not leave this work undone. Listen to me. Taking the opportunity to worship by resisting the temptation to blaspheme is the first moment of truth you will encounter in your quest on this scale. Now, let me tell you something. Even though you have unlocked the power of the 14 degrees leading up to worship, the opportunity to blaspheme is yet ever present. This is why the best illustration of this interval is a crossroads, for there are always two paths you can take. Now, the first path is the easy path. 'Tis a path draped in infamy, for the majority within this nation are following it, and they are engaging and persistent blasphemy. Why? It's because they are not qualified to walk in the ways of worship, for they are spiritually weak. And so I'm warning you, be careful of this path, for the future you incur on this path is not the future you seek. This brings us to path number 2. That is the path that leads you to worship. And although I will not label this path as the hard path, it is indeed harder to travel than the path that leads to blasphemy. Here is why. The path that leads to worship requires your death. Now, if you've been with us from the beginning, you have no reason to think this is strange. Let me tell you something. From the beginning of this podcast ministry, I have been quite clear that we all owe Elohim a death. Along these lines, we can die now to our flesh, our sinful nature, and every other facet of our being that is contrary to his divine nature, and we can live forever. Or we can live now, enjoying the pleasures of sin for a season, and then we can die forever. In either case, you will find it true. In one way or another, Yahuwah is going to kill you. The only question is, how do you want to die? My dear friends, understanding that death is the way of life, how do you want to die? The altar of worship, the altar of your heart. Now, this matter of spiritual life and death speaks to the primary illustration of worship in your quest. Enter the altar of your heart. Now, I understand that we are very late in this series on prejudice and the fear of Elohim to be introducing the primary illustration of worship. And yet, I was forced because there is so much to say about worship. And still, I often feel that I didn't say enough. Notwithstanding, it is apropos for us to address the primary illustration of worship in this section due to the critical nature of worship in succeeding the way of escape. Remember, worship is the final interval in every model of this way. Here lies the inflection and the problem. Vis-a-vis, many within our nation don't know what worship really is, and oftentimes they confuse worship with praise. Here is why this is so deadly. You can't praise your way out of tests, trials, and spiritual warfare. Quite the contrary, you must press your way. And this press, my friends, is the essence of worship. That's why you will always know you're on the right path. For when you take the opportunity to worship the Most High Elohim, you will be pressed. And if you're not being pressed, then you will never pass the test. And if you don't pass the test, you will never be truly blessed. Now, this is where praise comes in, my friend. To wit, after you commit your heart to worship at the altar of your heart, you are strengthened and renewed in the Ruach of Elohim. Then and only then will a true spirit of praise come upon you. Now, let me tell you something. This is the only praise Yahuwah is looking for. Listen to me. He does not receive the insane praise of fools and transgressors who believe they can worship Elohim whilst they take the opportunity to blaspheme. Quite the contrary. Yahuwah is looking for the praise of those who have sacrificed themselves at the altar of worship. He is looking for the praise of those who have died to their own carnal will, and yet by the power of his Ruach, they are made alive, and they are living still. Here lies the power of Elohim. For the altar of worship implies death and sacrifice. Ergo, where there is no death, there can be no sacrifice. And where there is no sacrifice, there can be no worship. And where there is no worship, there can be no newness of life. And this, my friends, is how you will succeed the moment of truth. To wit, when you reach the final phase of the way of escape, and Yahuwah brings you to the altar of worship, you, my friend, will present your body as a living sacrifice. And for your death, he will give you life. To live, one must die. Now, I know I'm working overtime here, but there is one last thing the Ruach is leading me to say on this matter. Vis-a-vis, the moment of truth is not only a recurring event in your quest, but it often occurs at the conclusion of the spiritual seasons that make up your life. Ergo, by the time you reach the moment of truth, you will be in a spiritually depleted state, for you've been dying to some degree for the full duration of this season. Ergo, this is where you will find yourself once you are on the verge of unlocking the fear of Elohim. And this is the reason. Now, the goal is that you should, at this point, offer yourself on the altar of worship as a testament to the fact that you have unlocked the powers of virtue, obedience, and faith, and you are reigning over prejudice, contempt, disobedience, and doubt. If you are, you will have fulfilled the prime objective of that spiritual season. Here's why this is so important. The only way you will find success in the ensuing season is if you have killed out every facet of your being that would prevent you from succeeding in the ensuing season. This is why every season ends with a moment of truth situated at the interval of worship. It is because worship is the altar of your heart, the place where you offer yourself, i.e., your will, as a sacrifice. And this is evidence that you have killed out every matter that is contrary to Yahuwah's will, and you are ready for a new season in your life. Now, that's the key, my friend, and a key takeaway I will capture with the following treasure box. Get this and never forget. There is a purpose for every spiritual season in your life, and there is a higher purpose that unites every spiritual season in your life. Along these lines, the higher purpose that unites every spiritual season is sure, vis-a-vis, it is to qualify you to obtain the seal of Elohim and to inherit everlasting life. To achieve this goal, Yahuwah has partitioned your spiritual life into seasons to determine if you are a serious contender for his seal and everlasting life. Here lies the inflection, vis-a-vis, the only way you can prove to the Most High that you are a true contender is by succeeding each test, trial, and spiritual battle you encounter in every season. Here is why. Every ensuing season is more difficult than the season before it. Ergo, every season is designed to prepare you to succeed in the ensuing season. Ergo, if you fail to pass the tests, trials, and spiritual battles in the current season, you have no chance of succeeding the tests, trials, and spiritual battles in the ensuing season. And this, my friend, is clear evidence that you are not a true contender for the seal of Elohim or everlasting life. For when the moment of truth has surely come, you were unwilling to sacrifice. My dear friends, this is why I refer to this interval as the moment of truth. For in order to continue your quest, you must choose death over life, making the conscious decision to present your body as a living sacrifice. Trust me, it's one thing to quote a scripture or to talk about the metaphorical sacrificial death. We must die in theory. But let me tell you something. It is a totally different thing when the time comes for you to draw near to the altar of worship and routinely lay down your life. If you need context, I advise you to read Genesis 22 and pay close attention to how Abraham refers to Yahuwah's command for him to sacrifice Isaac as an act of worship. And thus, I'll say it again, where there is no sacrifice, there can be no worship. And if you fail to pass the test of worship, you will never transition into the next spiritual season. Quite the contrary, you, my friend, will be like the former nation of Israel, trapped inside of a spiritual wilderness where you fall quarry to spiritual and physical death. Now, these things being what they surely are, at least one thing should be very clear vis-a-vis all the lessons I have taught you since the beginning of this exposition of lawlessness are designed to prepare you to succeed this moment of truth. My dear friends, every podcast, every inflection point, every revelation, every treasure box, and every final word was crafted to position you to take the opportunity to worship and to resist the temptation to blaspheme. If you do, here's what you will surely find. When you take the opportunity to worship, some facet of your carnal being will surely die. And yet, your spiritual man or woman will be renewed and quickened, and you will receive great power as you transition into a new season, which is the epitome of the newness of life. My dear friends, you must believe me. This is the only way you will succeed, the way of escape. So don't waste your time looking for some other path. You're a fool if you try. For I've said it once and I'll say it again. True worship requires sacrifice, and to live, one must die. Now, here is the final word. The final phase in every test is values reference, worship, and death. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, your progression from faith to the fear of Elohim will be one of the most difficult stretches of your quest. For the most part, it is because faith, obedience, virtue, and the fear of Elohim are the foundation of your spiritual existence. Here lies the inflection and a warning I advise you to never forget. To wit, you will never enjoy a successful quest if you fail to develop a firm foundation. What is more, the enemy knows this. Ergo, he will do whatever it takes to prevent you from developing a firm foundation. Why? It is because once you develop a firm foundation, you will receive the presence of Elohim and establish a progressive relationship with Him that will position you to have terrific success for the full duration of your quest. Heretofore, I recommend, if you truly desire a relationship with the Most High Elohim, here is where you should start. Develop a firm foundation of worship and be sure it is established upon a regulated mind and a regulated heart. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today. And as always, ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction. And if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Today, I want you to meditate on the word I have shared. We covered a lot of material, and so that is the only assignment for today. Consider these matters, my friends, and be watchful as you pray. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 494, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 4. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 495, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 5. I will post this podcast on Friday, June 27th, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch. Continue to pray. Continue in fasting. And most of all, continue to be focused. For the end is coming. The end is near.